Thanks for tuning in to another edition of Civil War Minutes. I'm your host James at Project Past. And in our last episode, we learned a little bit about the infamous West Point class of 1846. And as we learned, there was a lot of notable figures that went on to do some pretty incredible things, especially during the American Civil War. And also we learned that just because you came in number one in your class doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have a very prosperous military career. And after a lot of positive feedback, I decided to analyze another West Point class. And today we're going to analyze the West Point class of 1854. And before we do that, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can see all the past and future Civil War Minutes episodes, along with some in-person battlefield tours that I do. And I got some new content on the way, so if you don't want to miss that, hit that subscribe button and hit that notification bell so you know when new episodes come out. Alright, let's dive into the West Point class of 1854. Now, the West Point class of 1854 saw 46 people graduate. 37 of those 46 would go on to fight in the American Civil War. 23 for the Union and another 14 for the Confederacy. Now, I also want to share this stat with you because I feel like it's worth remembering. No other pre-Civil War class that graduated from a military academy lost more members than the class of 1854. The class of 1854 would lose 12 members killed and wounded throughout the American Civil War. Alright, so let's begin. Confederate General number 1. James Ewell Brown, commonly known as Jeb Stuart, would graduate 13 in his class, and he would come from a family of rich military heritage. His great-grandfather, Major Alexander Stuart, commanded a regiment in the American Revolution, and his father, Archibald Stuart, fought in the War of 1812. In his U.S. service, Stuart was involved in several conflicts with Native Americans, the Bleeding Kansas incident at the Kansas-Missouri border, and was personally sent by Lee to crush John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. Stuart resigned from the United States Army in May of 1861 to join the Confederacy, following Virginia's secession. He was assigned to report to Thomas Stonewall Jackson, who promoted him to colonel early on and assigned him to command cavalry units in the Army of the Shenandoah. He led his regiment in the First Battle of Bull Run, where the Union Army's early success was undone in part because of Stuart's cavalry. Stuart was a master of reconnaissance missions and was soon promoted to Major General after he executed successful raids at Catlet Station and along the Rappahannock River. His performance during the Gettysburg Campaign has been subject to much debate and controversy. Prior to 1863, the Union cavalry had been repeatedly embarrassed by Stuart's seemingly invincible troopers. But as the war entered its third year, this perception would begin to change. Stuart's cavalry fell out of touch with headquarters in the days leading up to Gettysburg, and left Lee and his fellow commanding officers with little to no intelligence in unfamiliar enemy territory. Stuart finally arrived late in the second day, and the following day was repulsed by Union cavalry, gaining no ground there. Stuart fought his final battle on the outskirts of Richmond on May 11, 1864. Stuart was shot by a dismounted Michigan trooper with a pistol, and this wound would prove to be fatal. He died the day after the battle on May 12, 1864, and he's currently buried at the Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. So that's a little bit about Jeb Stuart. Now let's dive into our second Confederate general. William Dorsey Pender would graduate 19th in his class, and he was referred to as Dorsey by his friends. He was first commissioned in the artillery, but the following year he requested a transfer to the 1st Dragoons. From 1856 to 1860, Pender served on the frontier, from New Mexico to California, all the way to Oregon to the Washington Territory. Before the outbreak of the war, Pender resigned his commission in the U.S. Army for a captaincy in the Confederate artillery. 2 months later, in May of 1861, he rose to the rank of colonel in command of the 3rd North Carolina Infantry Regiment. During the Peninsula Campaign of 1862, he assumed command of a brigade when Brigadier General James Johnson Pettigrew was wounded and captured at the Battle of Seven Pines. Following the battle, Confederate President Jefferson Davis personally promoted him to Brigadier General after observing his performance on the battlefield. During the 7 days battle the following month, he was wounded in the arm while his brigade recaptured and held an artillery battery previously captured by Union infantry. At Sharpsburg, Pender's brigade and the rest of Hill's division arrived just in time to rescue the Army of Northern Virginia's right flank from being turned. After Stonewall Jackson's death, General Robert E. Lee would reorganize the Army of Northern Virginia and would then elevate A.P. Hill to command the newly formed 3rd Corps. The 29-year-old Pender was thus promoted to Major General and received command of the division. Lee held the young officer in high esteem. On July 1, 1863, Pender fatally led his division into the Battle of Gettysburg. He led his division forward and hurled back the Union 1st Corps from Seminary Ridge. The following day, Lee ordered Pender's division to participate in an attack along the Union line, targeting Cemetery Hill. However, before the assault, Pender was wounded in the thigh by a shell fragment and carried from the field. After his wounding, the division's attack stalled and no effective assault was made on Cemetery Hill. Following the battle, Pender was taken to Staunton, Virginia, where an artery in his leg would rupture on July 18th. Surgeons would quickly amputate his leg, but he only survived a few hours following the surgery. The promising Pender's untimely death struck a blow to the Confederacy. Lee would say upon his death, "The loss of Major General Pender is severely felt by the Army and the country." Okay, so that was 2 Confederate officers. Now let's head over to the Union side. And this first officer I'm going to share with you, his story's kind of unique. John Trout Grebel would graduate 21st in his class and was assigned to the 2nd Artillery and then stationed at Newport, Rhode Island. In September of 1854, he was made 2nd lieutenant and sent to Tampa, Florida, where he served in the 3rd Seminole War for 2 years. He was then promoted to 1st lieutenant on March 3, 1857, and was appointed acting assistant professor of geography, history, and ethics in the United States Military Academy. He would remain here until September 24, 1860. He was then detailed for active duty at Fort Monroe in late 1860 and rendered efficient service in preventing its seizure on May 26, 1861. He was then sent to Newport News as a master of ordnance and trained volunteers in artillery practice. When the expedition into Big Bethel was planned, he was unexpectedly detailed to accompany it with 2 guns. In his own judgment, it was ill-advised. When the Union troops were repelled, by his management of the guns, he protected them from pursuit and destruction. Just as the battle was coming to a close, he had been given orders to withdraw his guns from the field. He was struck by a rifle ball in the right temple and instantly killed. Grebel would be the first graduate of the United States Military Academy to be killed in the war. Okay, so our next Union officer is Stephen H. Weed, who graduated 27th in his class. He received a brevet rank of 2nd lieutenant and was assigned to the 2nd U.S. Artillery on July 1st, 1854. He served in frontier duty in Texas. In December, he received his regular rank of 2nd lieutenant in the 4th U.S. Artillery. 2 years later, he was promoted to 1st lieutenant and fought in Florida in the Seminole Wars in 1856 and 1857. By now, he was a combat veteran commanding Battery B of the 4th U.S. Artillery. With the outbreak of the Civil War, Weed was promoted to captain of the newly formed Battery I, 5th U.S. Artillery in May of 1861. In 1862, he served in the Peninsula Campaign and at the Second Battle of Bull Run. On June 6, 1863, Weed left the regular Army Artillery to accept a commission as a Brigadier General in the Volunteer Army. He was assigned command of the 3rd Brigade in the 2nd Division of the 5th Corps. At Gettysburg, his brigade went to the relief of Colonel Strong Vincent's brigade on Little Round Top. His vanguard would repel a Confederate attack that had outflanked Vincent's right. Colonel Patrick O'Rourke of the 140th New York Infantry was killed leading that counterattack. Elements of Weed's brigade helped move the guns of Lieutenant Charles E. Hazlett's Battery D, 5th United States Artillery, to the top of the hill. Weed was mortally wounded in the chest, possibly by a sharpshooter hidden in Devil's Den, while standing near these guns. His last words to Lieutenant Hazlett were, "I would rather die here than that the rebels should gain an inch of this ground." Lieutenant Hazlett would also be killed trying to hear what Weed was saying. So, those were just 4 stories of the 37 members of the class of 1854 that would go on to fight in the American Civil War. There is a ton of stories out there, especially within the American Civil War, and I hope you learned a thing or two from this video, because I know I did. And like I always say, catch you on the next one.